Episode 385. The Tyranny Club's online game studio was once again shrouded in gloom. For the night shift workers, this was supposed to be the most exciting part of their day, the wee hours of the morning. But the moment they realized their brief respite was over and the tough times were back, a good number of them instantly claimed they were too tired or sleepy and called it a night. Of course, to request leave, they still had to get past Zhang Yu. But with Zhang Yu's mind weighed down and his attention elsewhere, the majority of them had already made their escape. As for Zhang Yu, he was just staring blankly at his strategy document. This was his life's work. He was convinced his strategy was the absolute best, brimming with confidence, and he hadn't held back from showing it off to everyone around him. Yet now, Blue Brook Guild's new record was like a slap to the face, leaving Zhang Yu's cheeks burning. Nightchill was still worried that Riverview would order him around, making him too embarrassed to face Lord Grimm again. Honestly, at that very moment, Zhang Yu was just as embarrassed to speak to Night Crossing Cold Pond. Pride invites loss, humility reaps reward. Zhang Yu was now getting a real taste of what that old saying meant. He was far too full of himself. But where exactly is my strategy lacking? Zhang Yu blankly opened a folder. Inside were all his research materials on the underground prison dungeon of Sin City. A swollen face is something you just have to ice yourself. Zhang Yu was too embarrassed to even face his own subordinate, Night Crossing Cold Pool, let alone anyone else. As the guild leader, he had even more face to lose. Anxious Yum was frantic. Where was the problem? The more anxious he became, the more chaotic his thoughts grew. And the more chaotic his thoughts, the less he could see the problem. I can't ask you Q. Maybe I should try Blue Brook Guild? That was the thought that crossed Zhang Yu's mind. But then it hit him. Blue Brook is competing with him for the record. Why would they ever tell Zhang Yu their strategy? That's just stupid. Zhang Yu realized this thought was a complete lapse in intelligence. Guess I'll have to rely on myself, Zhang Yu thought to himself. Since Cold Night Crossing hadn't come to ask him anything yet, he was perfectly happy to leave it that way. Believed. Meanwhile, Nightchill was just as glad that River didn't come over to bother him. The two of them were perfectly in sync, each thinking exactly what the other was. Yeshu had already communicated with Misty Rain's Misty Rain Kang Kang, so he was mentally prepared when Tyrannical Ambition came knocking. But there was no response from the other side. Yeshu didn't understand the reason, simply assuming the people from Tyrannical Ambition truly held a super deep grudge against him. So he just ignored it. After successfully buying out the guide, Blue River let out a long sigh of relief, but he didn't relax just yet. He had fully grasped the guide's true worth. But as a seasoned online gamer, he could also tell that this guide wasn't something only a top-tier pro like Yeq could have come up with. But if they were the ones doing it, how long would it take them to produce a guide of this caliber? Blue River couldn't estimate it. After all, the strategy guide was right there in his hands, plain to see. The only other thought is, why didn't I think of that? As for how long it would take me to figure it out without a guide, how could anyone possibly estimate that? But after successfully breaking the records of Misty Rain Tower and Tyrannical Ambition, Blue River at least knew his Blue Brook Guild was now in the lead. Think of a strategy guide as a piece of proprietary tech, and by buying it, Blue Brook Guild has secured a technological edge. Misty Rain and Tyrannical Ambition attempted to develop their own strategies, but for the time being, they couldn't reach the top tier. In fact, if it weren't for the records set by Tyrannical Ambition and Misty Rain, Blue River might not have been convinced to buy the guide outright. It was seeing the records set by those two guilds that made Blue Brook realize, the true value of the guide in their hands. It wasn't an absolute guarantee, and it might not be the only way, but for now, buying it out meant staying ahead. Of course, we're going to squeeze every last drop of value out of this bot strategy. The strategy guide was already being used by Blue River's elite teams. He also instructed them to keep an eye out for any possible improvements while they were at it. Blue River was mobilizing the collective strength of the guild, aiming to maintain their lead in dungeon strategy and technology. And so the night passed. The strategy had been perfected by Yeq. Though Blue Brook Guild sought new plans and strength, they couldn't produce any new tricks. As for Misty Rain, they already knew there was no way they could get the strategy from Lord Grimm. They'd been right on the cusp of making a name for themselves on the leaderboards, only to watch the chance slip right through their fingers. The regret was bitter indeed. They had the strength to be competitive, but making a frequent appearance in dungeon leaderboards was no easy feat, let alone staying at the top of the leaderboard. They had a chance like this right in front of them, but they didn't cherish it. Now that it's gone, what about tyrannical ambition? Zhang Yu was absolutely not going to back down. He kept pushing himself, studying harder. But the fact that he'd grown so confident and self-satisfied with his own strategies was a clear sign he'd already hit his ceiling. Breaking through that limit now, it wouldn't be that easy. Too proud to ask for help, he stubbornly pushed through the night alone. Frustrated, it left him utterly frazzled, and he had nothing to show for it. Although Nightchill hadn't gone to talk to Zhang Yu, he still understood the bigger picture. He had also gathered some of the guild's top players to study and refine their outdated strategy. But after a whole night, they still hadn't made any progress, leaving them all with long faces. Why would Ye Shu bother with any of that? With the guide rights bought out, he was free to relax. That night he cleared all the mandatory quests from level 31 to 38. Lord Grimm was nearly at level 39. And already he was diving into the strategies for the next dungeon. The highest level guild players on the 10th server had already reached level 39, on the very cusp of hitting 40 and moving on to the next dungeon. Thanks to the Christmas event, the Flaming Forest and City of Sin dungeons were practically over in a flash. Yoshu sold the Sin City dungeon guide with ridiculous ease. Blue River himself was shocked by the low price he accepted for the exclusive rights. Selling the guide to the whole world might seem more profitable, but that's not the case. Just like how the major guilds now dare not ask Lord Grimm for help with record runs. Using a guide to set records is something the guilds themselves can know about, but it's not convenient for word to get out. If every player knew that the guild's records were all thanks to a single strategy guide, then fundamentally, that's no different from hiring Lord Grimm to do the job for them. In the end, it's still not their own skill. Then the record would lose its meaning once again. Then the guild's record run would be for nothing, and Yixiu would have no business to conduct. It's a lose-lose situation for everyone. So, it's best to trade this guide privately and take it slow. If you just mass-mail the guild leaders, who knows which one might be a schemer, playing it cool, waiting for another guild to use the guide and set a record before dropping a bombshell. You have to guard against that kind of underhanded tactic. Take this time, for example. During his entire exchange with Misty Rain's Kang Kang, Yixiu never once let slip that he'd sold the strategy guide to Bluebrook Pavilion. But as Misty Rain Kang Kang kept guessing, Yixiu gave him absolutely nothing to work with. He was guarding against any future trouble. After all, this was the second time they were launching an offensive. It was nothing like the initial startup phase.